"So, how was school yesterday?" her father asked Johanna at breakfast, as he often did. "It was all right," she replied, through a mouthful of cereal, in her customary way. "Is that it?" "Yes." A pause. "We did the Vikings." "Oh, good. Longboats?" She nodded. "Pillaging?" She nodded. Another pause. "And Harry, how was your day?" "It was rubbish. I knew it would be." "Mr. Grundy?" Harry nodded savagely, but seemed unable to give any further explanation. "Oh well," said their dad at length. "It's always nice to chat like this, but the 7:45 awaits. Have a good day, both of you." He picked up his briefcase and headed for the station. "About time too," said Mr. Phigg, emerging from the little door. "Though it was a fascinating conversation, I must say. If the shadow flock ever want a night off, we could send the Blake household round to lull people to sleep instead. Talking of which, any more odd dreams last night?" The children shook their heads. "Good. Oh, and Harry?" "Yes?" "I'm working on Mr. Grundy." "What do you mean?" Mr. Phigg grinned and tapped his nose with his finger. "Can't really say just now, but teachers do sometimes like a change of scene. Secondments, job shadowing. You never know where they might turn up. Just a word to the wise. Though, actually, in this case, I sent a postcard to the wise." He smiled into Harry's puzzled face. "Leave it with me. But come on, you two. Let's see what's happening at bed quarters." Johanna and Harry jumped down from their stools and followed Mr. Phigg through the little door at the back of the kitchen. It was a fine morning again on the Slumber Downs, and Bartram ran over to meet them when he saw them walking across the field. "It's funny," thought Johanna, "how normal all this seems now. Who would have imagined?" Going into bed quarters, they nearly fell over Simon. He was bent over one of the monitors, which was on the floor with its back off. He was twisting a screwdriver with an air of determination. "I don't know what's going on," he said. "We keep losing signals and getting strange interference. I haven't seen anything like it before." "How long has it been happening?" asked Mr. Phigg. "Just the last couple of days." He put the monitor back together, and Johanna and Harry helped lift it back into place. There was a loud crackle, and indistinct shapes spun around on the screen. Mr. Phigg smacked the top of the monitor firmly with the flat of his hand, and suddenly a clearer picture appeared. "There," he said, "I don't take any nonsense from machines." "It's the Downs," said Johanna, as the camera panned across green fields with the sea in the distance. "And there's the windmill," added Harry. Only its roof and sails could be seen behind a huge grey fence which had been built all around the site, protecting the building work which was clearly now well underway. As they watched, a gate swung open and security guards in dark uniforms checked over a huge bulldozer and a concrete mixer truck which were waiting to get onto the site. "But it shouldn't be showing the windmill," said Simon, adjusting the controls to no obvious effect. "It should be showing our fields. We know that windmill is very close to the join between the grey world and the Slumber Downs, but it's definitely on the grey folk... Sorry, children, nothing personal. It's definitely on the grey folk side of the divide." "You said that funny things happen around those edges," said Johanna. "I wonder whether all the digging that's going on there is messing up the join and causing this interference, even if the builders don't know they're doing it." "I think that may be it," said Mr. Phigg. "You know, I've always had an odd feeling about all this windmill stuff. I still don't know why, but there's something not quite right about it." "Not quite right?" said Johanna, jumping up. She was furious. "It's completely wrong. Look at the mess they're making of the Downs. And when I think of those poor animals—" "Yes, yes," Mr. Phigg interrupted, "I know all that. But that's the sort of thing grey folk do. I'm talking about something else. That man. I'm surprised you have anything to do with Harry and me if we're all so terrible." "Oh, Johanna, you two aren't like that, but you know what I mean." "Now," said Simon quickly, in an effort to diffuse things, "don't you want to see what happened last night? I think I've got it working properly." "This is definitely worth seeing," said Bartram, grinning. Johanna's curiosity got the better of her crossness. "Oh, all right." Mr. Phigg and the children gathered around the monitor. A familiar shot of the shadow flock heading off to work filled the screen. The sheep were ambling along a country lane lined with trees and high hedges. They spotted Bartram in the middle of the crowd, butting the rear of the sheep in front with a sly flick of his head. "Good shot," said Harry. "She's so slow," Bartram replied. "I kept treading on her heels." "Hush," said Simon. "Now, watch this." Just as they were finishing for the night, the sheep had moved out onto more open ground, and suddenly, as if from nowhere, 4 nightmares thundered into view and circled around them. But there was no panic from the flock. In what was clearly a practiced manoeuvre, they shaped up to the threat, with their outer circle alternating sheep who were facing inward with ones facing outward. "I came up with this," Bartram explained proudly. "The ones facing out can see what's going on, and they tell the ones facing in when to kick. The nightmares aren't sure what we're doing and have kept their distance on the last couple of nights." The horses were circling warily, snorting and stamping on the ground. "Good stuff," said Mr. Phigg. "Looks like a standoff." "Not quite," said Bartram. "Watch." On the screen there were some new arrivals. A column of soft centaurs trotted into view. The first pair were playing trumpets. The second pair carried large wicker baskets full of rose petals, which they scattered around them as they went along. Then came Norman in his fur-trimmed jacket. The centaurs moved in between the nightmares and the flock and circled in the opposite direction from the horses. Eventually, Norman held up his hand as a signal to the centaurs to stop. They turned to face the nightmares, who had also stopped and were waiting to see what would happen next. "We've all had quite enough of you now, thank you very much," said Norman. "It's not as if people want bad dreams, you know. Off you go." He waved his hand airily in their general direction. "Off you go, back to your silly secret stable." The 4 nightmares remained silent. Slowly they walked together to stand in front of Norman, stopping in a line about 5 yards away from him. Then they all turned around, so they were facing away from him. "Be off with you," Norman repeated, with a nervous edge to his voice now. "Go on." Then suddenly his words changed into a high-pitched squawk. "Go away!" On some hidden signal, the 4 horses had started kicking into the soft ground they were standing on. They were showering him with mud. They went on and on with their kicking until the squealing centaur was virtually covered in muck. Then they ran a few yards further away, turned and faced the centaurs, pawing the ground and whinnying. I, Norman spluttered. I think it might be wise to retreat now, gentlemen. Purely tactically, of course." He turned and cantered off towards the woods on the skyline. The other centaurs quickly followed, and as soon as they were moving, the nightmares charged towards them. The retreat was soon a disordered rout, the centaurs galloping away as fast as they could, shrieking as they went, with the horses snapping at their tails and shoving them to encourage them on their way. A moment later, they had all disappeared into the trees, leaving the shadow flock open-mouthed and alone. Eventually, the screen showed Bartram shrug and say, "Oh well, time to go home, I think." The picture faded from the screen, and the watchers stood for a moment in silence. "At least they tried," said Johanna finally. "You do have to stand up to bullies." "But the bullies won," said Harry. "That's not supposed to happen. What are we going to do now?" "I don't know," Mr. Phigg replied. "We still need to reinforce our team, I suppose. But how?" "Buck up, everyone," said Johanna. "We're not beaten yet. We'll think of something. And we've got a march again this evening."